I didn't see apartheid. I looked for the genocide and I couldn't find it. I spoke a lot more Arabic than I would have in Hebrew in Jerusalem. I saw people getting along wonderfully well with each other. I saw hijabbed women that were totally respected. So apparently, the Jews are pretty useless when it comes to genocides.
Today's guest is Dr. Gad Saad, evolutionary psychologist, scholar at the Declaration of Independence Center for the Study of American Freedom at the University of Mississippi, and author of the instant #1 New York Times bestseller, Suicidal Empathy. Born into a Jewish family in Beirut, Lebanon, Dr. Saad fled anti-Jewish persecution during the Lebanese Civil War. Decades later, after October 7th, he argues the same warning signs are now spreading throughout Western civilization itself. Dr. Gad Saad, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me back. Pleasure to be with you.
Dr. Saad, did the reaction to October 7th become the clearest example yet of what you call suicidal empathy? Why did so many people respond to the massacre of Jews with moral confusion instead of moral clarity?
I mean, I wouldn't say it's the best exemplar of suicidal empathy because people might have, albeit wrong, reasons why they may exhibit greater empathy towards the Gazans than they do to the Jews. There are other examples that are so unequivocally insane, right? I mean, again, I'm not arguing that it is in any way justifiable for people to have exhibited the kind of Jew hatred that they have post October 7th. But there you can argue, look, people are involved geopolitically on either sides of the fence. You know, people are tribal and so on. So at least there is some means by which you can argue that the manner by which people reacted post October 7th against the Jews is in part due to suicidal empathy because they're targeting their empathy towards the wrong targets. But there is more than just suicidal empathy. But let me give you examples where it could only be suicidal empathy in the most extreme of senses. And of course, I've got millions of these in the book, including the example with October 7th. A woman is gang raped in Germany by guys who are speaking in Arabic and Farsi. But then when the police comes and asks her questions that hopefully will identify who the perpetrators were, she lies to them and says that they're speaking in German because she wouldn't want to marginalize the Middle Eastern community, right? There, it's the purest distillation of suicidal empathy because you can't argue, well, there are different possible geopolitical positions that one can take. You are being gang raped, and your first reflex is to protect the identity of your rapist. So that would be one example. Maybe I could give you one more, and then we can, discuss further. A woman goes to Haiti, a white woman, white progressive woman, because she wants to demonstrate that it is simply incorrect and racist to think that Black men ever commit any violence. There is absolutely no evidence that Black men engage in any violence. Well, she gets to Haiti, she gets to the capital, Port-au-Prince, where she is then slapped by this thing called reality, whereby a Haitian man takes her to a rooftop and rapes her all night. And as he's raping her, she is pleading with him, look, I am a BLM, Black Lives Matter supporter myself, and I am a Malcolm X supporter myself. And apparently she was surprised that that didn't stop him from raping her. But then she concludes after the rape, she writes this big essay from which I quote, where she says that the bottom line is she was very thankful for the experience because it showed her the hatred that caused this Black man to rape her was due to white supremacy. So the white supremacy in the United States is what caused the Haitian man in Port-au-Prince to rape the white woman. That's suicidal empathy.
What psychologically causes seemingly intelligent people to reject obvious reality even while the facts stare them in the face?
Well, I get into all this at great length in the book. Let me just give you a few mechanisms that explain it. So first, let's explain what suicidal empathy is. Empathy is a perfectly laudable virtue. We are a social species. You should expect that evolution has endowed us with the capacity to empathize. If for you and I to have a meaningful conversation, I need to put myself in your mind. You need to do the same, vice versa. This is called cognitive empathy or theory of mind. So nobody is contesting the fact that empathy matters. We choose our spouses and our best friends and our physicians and our therapists and our veterinarians based on whether they seem to exhibit the capacity for empathy. The problem, as Aristotle explained to us several thousand years ago, is everything in moderation. He called it the golden mean. Too little of something is not good, too much of something is not good, and much of life is about finding that sweet spot. I use that exact principle for empathy. If you have no empathy, you're called a psychopath. But if your empathy is hyperactive, if it hyperfires in the wrong situations towards the wrong targets, then you end up with suicidal empathy. Now, to your question of why that arises, again, it's a complicated, long story, which I get into extensively in the book, but let me give you one specific example. In my earlier book, in my 2020 book, The Parasitic Mind, I basically argued that in order for human beings to have parasitized thinking, that they're no longer able to engage in critical thinking, they have to be infected with a set of ideological brainworms. Well, once you're infected with these ideological brainworms, it makes it very easy for you to succumb to suicidal empathy. Let me give a concrete example and then I'll cede the floor back to you. Take, for example, the parasitic idea of cultural relativism. Cultural relativism purports that it is inappropriate for you to ever judge the cultural or religious practices of another society. If another society wishes to engage in female genital female genital mutilation of 5-year-old girls, shut up, racist. If they wish to engage in child brides, shut up, racist. If they wish to commit honor killings, shut up, racist. Well, if I internalize the parasitic idea of cultural relativism, then that makes me much more likely to succumb to the open border immigration policies of the suicidally empathetic. Why? Because once I am impotent to cast judgment on other people's cultural and religious values, then who am I to say that we shouldn't open the doors to millions of such people? So it's a 1-2 punch. By first infecting my ability to think via the parasitic mind, that opens the door for me to swim in the infinity pool of suicidal empathy.
Now, we know that Jews have simultaneously been accused of being capitalists, exploiters, communists, revolutionary parasites, globalists, white colonizers. Why is Jew hatred so psychologically adaptable? And why do conspiracy-minded societies always inevitably arrive at the Jews?
Right. So I recently gave an address at the World Symposium against Anti-Zionism, and I opened up with an analogy. So, as you notice in my work, parasitic mind and so on, suicidal empathy, I use biological explanations, sometimes literal explanations, sometimes metaphorical explanations to explain why these things happen. So I compare the ever shifting forms of Jew hatred to the human immune system. And let me explain what I mean by that. The immune system evolved to be adaptable, meaning that if the immune system had only evolved to literally attack, say, a specific set of pathogens, let's call them pathogens A, B, and C, and it can only recognize and attack those 3 pathogens. Well, we know that one of the features of pathogens is that they very quickly and rapidly mutate. So if pathogen A becomes pathogen A star, well, now the immune system would be defeated, because if it has 0 degrees of freedom and it could only target ABC, once it becomes A star or A prime, then we're all dead. Therefore, adaptability is an inherent adaptation of the immune system. Well, that's exactly what Jew hatred is. Once one form of Jew hatred is defeated into the bin, the historical bin, trash bin, well, we simply mutate into a new form. So the latest form is anti-Zionism, because now that is palpable to the ear of the average Westerner. I don't hate Jews. I love Jews. I just hate Jews that wish to have a sovereign nation. That's very different. So I only hate Zionists, but I love Jews. because that way I can go to the cool kids party in Manhattan and say, no, I even have Jewish friends myself. It's just the Zionists I hate. So it really is exactly the same structure. As you resolve the Jew hatred of Jews caused the bubonic plague in the Middle Ages in Europe, well, we shift to another one. Now we've got the protocols of the elders, whatever, of Zion. It's a global Jewish conspiracy. Once we solve that, well, now Jews are parasites that suck the blood of a society. Once we solve that, well, it's the blood libel. The Jews use the goys' blood to make matzah ball soup. Once we solve that, we get to anti-Zionism. So it's a beautiful process from the Jew haters' perspective, because there's an infinite new variants of Jew hatreds that we can always look forward to in the future.
Now, you also mentioned the Zionist sharks in Egypt. Some people might have thought that was a joke, but that was true. Why do some societies, especially Arab societies, psychologically need Jews to be the villains? Maybe you can speak about your upbringing also in Lebanon.
So I'm going to answer it both in the Arab specific context and in the more general eternal Jew hatred that exists not only in Islamic societies. In Islamic societies, of course, Jew hatred is ultimately linked back to the canons of Islam, right? I mean, Muhammad himself on his deathbed said, promise me that you will get rid of the Jews. And of course, the answer, the psychological reason is very simple. All these other peoples had fallen into line into accepting Muhammad as the final prophet and so on, whereas the Jews said, sorry, thank you. We already have monotheism for thousands of years. We're not interested. Well, he was hurt by that rejection, and I'm going to forevermore take out my frustration and anger at you. And so there's an endless number of passages in the various canonical texts of Islam that speak to Jew hatred. So that's the Arab specific context. And to your point about my upbringing, I was born and raised in Lebanon. Arabic is my mother tongue. I grew up in the Middle East, so I fully understand the hatred, even in the context of progressive, tolerant, modern Lebanon, the Paris of the Middle East. You still had Jew hatred very casually in every interaction in society. Okay, now, but there is a more general, but what about Jew hatred in the Middle Ages in Christian Europe? What about Jew hatred of the neo-Nazis that we see that attack me all day long on the internet and so on? So here I'm going to invoke an explanation that I've been using a lot recently, because it uses, my psychological training to explain Jew hatred. There is something in psychology called the self-serving bias. The self-serving bias is the mechanism by which people ascribe causality to their lives, specifically how they ascribe successes and failures. Typically, most people ascribe successes internally. I did well on the exam because I'm smart and I studied hard. It's because of me that I did well on the exam. And they ascribe failures externally. I did poorly on the exam because Professor Saad is a nasty Jewish professor and he's unfair and mean. Therefore, that reflex to attribute successes internally and failures externally is an indelible feature of the architecture of the human mind. Now, imagine if I have a culprit called the Jew that I can easily use to explain both my individual failings and my collective failings, then it's perfect. But now the next question would be, but why the Jew? Why are you choosing the Jew as the culprit for all your failures? Well, here it's because no other group of people have had the following reality more often than the Jew. This is what Amy Chua, the Yale law professor and mentor to J.D. Vance, refers to as market dominant minorities. These are minuscule groups of people in a society that tend to be boxing well above their weight class, right? Now, it's not only the Jew that is a market dominant minority. Armenians are in some places. The Lebanese, non-Jewish Lebanese are like that in Western Africa. There are the Chinese and many Southeast societies that are like that. So it's not that the Jew is the only market dominant minority, but it is certainly true that no peoples has as often been a minuscule minority with a incredibly oversized influence. So if I am a prospective superhero actor, but I don't get the role for Superman that I was really hoping to get, well, who really controls Hollywood? It's the Jews. So I didn't get the position because the Jews stopped me. If I'm applying for a small business loan for my brilliant idea for a new restaurant and I get my small business loan rejected, well, who controls the banks? It's the Jews. If my wife cheats on me with the very sexy Greek gardener, well, she probably consumed pornography and that's what put that in her head. Well, who creates pornography? It's the Jews. Now, of course, all of these accusations are inherently false, but those tropes exist. So now I can rest assured that any of my personal failings really have an easy explanation. Look to the demonic Jew to answer it.
Now, in your book, which I have right behind me, you make a wood cricket Jew analogy. What psychological need is fulfilled when Jews publicly align themselves with our enemies? Do Jews subconsciously believe that acceptance can be earned through self-erasure?
Exactly. So, and let me, for your listeners and viewers who may not know what that term means, let me explain it. Again, it draws on a biological analogy. The wood cricket abhors water. It's not the actual insect. The actual wood cricket wants nothing to do with water. Once it is parasitized by a hairworm, the hairworm ends up in the wood cricket's brain, altering its neuronal circuitry so that the parasitized wood cricket now happily jumps into water, committing suicide, hence suicidal empathy. That also explains what you asked me earlier. Why does that arise? He's perfectly happy to commit suicide because his brain has been fully hijacked. He's just an executor of the reproductive interests of the parasite that has taken over its brain. Well, why does the hairworm need him to jump into water and commit suicide? Because it could only complete its reproductive cycle in water, right? So Gabor Maté, the king of the wood cricket Jews, goes around and says, hey, I'm a Holocaust survivor. And let me repeat here something that I discuss in the book and I've discussed in many other forums, but it's worth repeating. For Gabor Mate to say that he's a Holocaust survivor is astounding because at 6 months old, he was placed at the care of another family. 6 months old children are not in any meaningful way cognizant or conscious of the reality that they're facing. If he is a Holocaust survivor, then I too am a Holocaust survivor because in the 1940s, I was a spermatozoa swimming in my father's testicles. Therefore, not only am I a war refugee of Lebanon, you are looking right now at a Holocaust survivor, even though technically I wasn't born during the Holocaust, but using the very wood crickety logic of Gabor Mate, I too am a Holocaust survivor. So he is an addiction expert. So he's very kind and enlightened. He rises above tribal affiliations. And he knows because he's a Holocaust survivor and therefore he has experienced firsthand the Nazis, that the Nazis are not even close to how diabolical the IDF soldiers are. Imagine how enlightened he must be to have the moral calculus to recognize that notwithstanding that he had to face the Nazis as a 6 months old infant, he's right here telling you that there is no greater evil than the Jews. And so then he could stroke his hair in the mirror of moral preening and say, I am truly an enlightened person because I've transcended this my survival instinct.
Now, one of the other examples that you gave was the Hebrew University researcher who concluded that the absence of rape by IDF soldiers somehow proved Israel's evil. What does that reveal about what you're speaking about?
Yes. That one, forgive me for correcting you, that example is not from Suicidal Empathy. It's from the earlier book, The Parasitic Mind. So this is Tal Nitzan, Jewish Tal Nitzan, who wanted to demonstrate in her doctoral work at Hebrew University. By the way, Hebrew University, when I recently visited Israel to both speak in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, I was told by some the main professor who was trying to invite me to speak at Hebrew University, that it might be difficult to get the senior administrators to host me at Hebrew University. Gad Saad is too dangerous to speak at Hebrew University. That's what wood crickets look like. But anyways, coming back to Talnit Zan, she wanted to demonstrate through her research that the IDF soldiers commit rampant orgiastic rape of Palestinian women. So she went and did her research. And her research wasn't just asking the IDF, tell me honestly, did you commit rape? Right? I mean, she interviewed all the Palestinian women and so on. So it was her, she did her full research, and to her great dismay, she couldn't identify a single instance of rape by IDF soldiers on Palestinian women. Now, in science, there's this thing called the falsification principle that was introduced by Karl Popper, the philosopher of science, who himself happened to be Jewish. The falsification principle is the idea that for anything to be within the realm of science, there needs to be in the abstract data that could falsify the theory. Now, it may not be falsifiable because the theory is correct, but there must be some data that could falsify it. Now, let me give you an example of a concept that is not within the scientific realm. The principle of destiny is not falsifiable. Why? Because if I say I'm going to conduct an experiment to test my destiny, if I walk out of my house today and I cross the street and a truck hits me, that was my destiny. If I cross the street and the truck doesn't hit me, that was my destiny, meaning all possible states of the world result in that being my destiny. Therefore, I cannot design an experiment that would falsify destiny. Whatever is my destiny. Therefore, destiny is not falsifiable. Well, this is exactly what wood cricket Talnit Zan did, right? Because what did she do? She said, I want to prove that the IDF soldiers are evil rapists. If I show that they are rapists, I've proven that. But once I showed that they did not rape anybody, that also shows that they are evil. Why? Because imagine how much their heart must be full of darkness towards the Palestinian women that they weren't even worthy of being raped. So if the soldiers raped the Palestinians, they're evil. If the soldiers didn't rape the Palestinians, they are evil. All roads lead to the IDF soldiers being evil.
Now, why are highly educated institutions and highly educated professors often the most detached from reality?
Well, because the disciplines where you have the least amount of parasitic idea and suicidal empathy, not none, but the least amount, are the disciplines that are wedded to reality. So the engineering school, the business school are less likely to have their professors parasitize because there's this thing called reality that could slap you back out of your stupidity, right? Because if I build a bridge using postmodernist lesbian dance theory physics, then the bridge will collapse. So therefore, I have to rely on this thing called nature and physical properties, on engineering principles to build the bridge. If I build a economic model to predict consumer choice using lesbian dance theory mathematics, then that model won't predict the economy or consumer choice. So inherently, some disciplines in academia are somewhat more inoculated against all of this imbecility because they're wedded to an applied reality. But if I am in many of the disciplines that are fully decoupled from reality, there's absolutely no link to reality, then I could stand on top of my pedestal at the top of the ivory tower. I could pontificate all the nonsense, and there is never an corrective mechanism. So that's why I always remind people that the reason why all of these dreadful ideas that led both to the parasitic mind and to suicidal empathy, the reason why they all stem from intellectual ecosystems, it's because it uniquely takes requires intellectuals to come up with some of the dumbest ideas.
I want to ask you about your recent trip to Israel. One of the most emotional parts of your Israel reflection was you said that your family was still reeling from leaving Israel after the trip. What emotionally affected you so deeply there? Think about.
Sure. Sure. Well, first of all, this I'm wearing this. I don't know if you could see it. I bought it in a Jerusalem souk, as did my entire family. We bought a whole bunch of stuff. Of course, I mean, there's the inherent just, you are in the Holy Land that's going to move you. Now, I've been to Israel many previous times, but my wife and children had never been. So I was now rediscovering Israel through their eyes. So that was magical. But, in a more earthly manner, the love that I received in Israel was truly, you know, humbling and astounding. And even more than that, the people who were serving as our hosts were truly divine beings. I mean, when you're in my line of work and you're in the public eye often, you can easily become jaded about the human spirit because I mean, yes, I receive infinite love, but I also see all of the hate. So you could start thinking that the default value of most people is that, you know, they're dreadful creatures. Whereas the people who were handling us had such a generosity of spirit, such a hospitable bent that you really felt as though you were in front of these divine creatures. I often joke that, and this is not my maxim, but there's an old maxim that says that the more I know people, the more I love my dogs, because dogs are truly the purest of creatures. They possess all of the noble characteristics that we hope to have, and few, if any, of our faults. Well, the people that were hosting us in Israel were as pure as the dogs. Now, unlike in Islamic societies where the dog is a disgusting creature, I view the dog as a truly divine creature. So to be compared to the dog is actually a big compliment. So for all sorts of reasons, I thought that it was a magical, magical trip.
I mean, also as a Jew who fled Lebanon, what did it feel like emotionally to walk openly through Israel and feel protected rather than vulnerable?
Well, it's incredible, right? I mean, I knew that anywhere I turned, first of all, of course, tons of people recognized me, tons of people had guns, and tons of people were going to go out of their way to protect me. So it really felt good. And by the way, this is not unlike how I feel as I'm now leaving Montreal to move to the United States, permanently at the University of Mississippi. And I'm not saying this because they're my new institution and I want to promote them. Not at all. It really is relevant to our conversation. When I first visited University of Mississippi, I felt exactly the way that you mentioned about how I was feeling in Israel, in that I didn't have to constantly look over my shoulder at who was coming at me. I took a 2-year leave of absence from my home University of Montreal because it was becoming quite challenging to be a high profile Jewish professor at my university. The university that I'm leaving now in Montreal has been colloquially referred to as Gaza University for 25 plus years. This is where Benjamin Netanyahu was canceled back in 2002, right? So this is a university that already had a particular political bent well before October 7th. And so to now be able to go to the United States, where, of course, there are hateful people anywhere. So it's not as though, and magically going to the United States, there's not going to be someone who dislikes what I say, but I certainly feel a lot more welcomed than I do currently in Quebec. Now, again, I'm not trying to be diplomatic. There are wonderful things about my home, well, not my homeland, but my adopted land of Quebec. We fled Lebanon, came to Montreal, Canada, had a wonderful life here. Regrettably, though, the last 20, 25 years, the demographic realities are such that in the same way that we fled Lebanon, different context, we are now leaving to the United States.
Now, you mentioned that you spoke Arabic throughout much of Israel and described, Arabs and Jews interacting peacefully everywhere you went. So I'm thinking you didn't really see apartheid over there, did you?
I didn't see apartheid. I didn't see the daily genocide of Arab people. I was looking for it so that I can kneel and cry, just like at the death of George Floyd, because I'm a very kind person. I want to cry, but I looked for the genocide and I couldn't find it. What I did see is tons of Arabic speaking guys with whom I went to the shawarma places and everybody was speaking to me in Arabic. All of our drivers spoke in Arabic whenever we went shopping. This was less in Tel Aviv, more in Jerusalem. As a matter of fact, my son at one point looked at me and said, I'm really frustrated that you didn't teach us Arabic, Daddy, because I'm seeing you're speaking to everyone in Arabic. And I spoke a lot more Arabic than I would have in Hebrew in Jerusalem. So, yes, I didn't see the genocide. I saw people getting along wonderfully well with each other. I saw hijabbed women that were totally respected. I even heard in Jaffa the call of the prayers at the mosque. So apparently the Jews are pretty useless when it comes to genocides.
When you think of the future of Israel, are you optimistic or pessimistic of what the future holds?
A bit of both. Look, and yeah, in the same way that, by the way, when people ask me, are you, now that you've written Parasitic Mind and Suicidal Empathy, are you optimistic that we're going to get out of this or pessimistic? Let me answer that one first, and then I'll flip it to your Israel question. I'm optimistic about the West in that not I think, I know that there are a set of autocorrective mechanisms that you could implement to resolve the problem. So that there is a solution. The pessimism stems from the fact that I don't see the West having the willingness to implement those solutions. So there is a solution, but you don't want to take it, right? Your physician says there is a cure for your ailment, but you say, no, I refuse to take it. I don't believe in Western medicine. Well, then you're going to die, right? So that's answering the question for the West. As far as Israel is concerned, it's kind of the same thing. If there is a way to eradicate the endemic Jew hatred that exists, of course, universally, but certainly in the context of the Middle East, then I think the Middle East would be the absolute richest place on earth in a cultural sense, right? There are beautiful features of Middle Eastern societies, even Islamic societies, right? The culture of hospitality, the culture of loyalty, the culture of, just this affection that you feel, right? Men walk hand in hand together. They're not a couple. There is a warmth that comes from the Middle East that regrettably is always tainted by this tribalism. Again, regrettably, that comes from religion. If there is a pill that people can take that recognizes the rights of different peoples to coexist, I think that not only Israel, but the rest of the Middle East will flourish in ways that are incalculable. So I don't know if it will happen, but inshallah, it will soon.
Dr. Gad Saad, thank you so much for your time. I truly appreciate this conversation as always. How can people follow you, find the book, whatever you'd like to plug? The floor is yours.
This is it, people. This is the mind vaccine. Please go out and purchase it. People always say to me, how can we help, Dr. Saad? Well, I wrote the book. Go buy it. Gift it to people. And I'm not saying this because I want to make money and so on. It's because there is a blueprint in there that provides you with what is ailing the West and how to resolve that ailment. So please consider purchasing it. Of course, I've got my show, The Sad Truth, SAAD. You can follow me on social media. I'm probably most active on X at Gad Saad, GADSAAD. I'm easy to find.
Great. Thank you again. Wishing you all the best.
Thank you, sir.
If you have a 401k or an IRA, please listen. Gold is at record highs. What many people don't know is this: you can move part of your retirement money legally and without tax penalties into physical gold you actually own. Alpha Omega Gold helps you do this through a gold IRA. Your gold is real. It is stored safely. It is in your name. Learn more at ao.gold/stand. Alpha Omega Gold is our sponsor, and they proudly stand with Israel.